Some people think that September is way too early to be starting spooky season, and some people think it's also way too late. But regardless of when it should officially begin, I'm gonna be reading spooky books for spooky season. And for my first book, we are reading The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. So I read Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas for my vampire book video that I did last October, and I just really loved her writing style. I loved how atmospheric it was while mixed with the historical elements, so that really made me want to read this one next. I've already started it. I'm like 4 chapters in or so. So this book takes place in Mexico as well during the aftermath of the Mexican War of Independence. And you're following a young woman who kind of needs to get out of a certain situation. So she ends up marrying a really wealthy Don who owns a hacienda. And after they're married, he tries to convince her to stay in the city with him in his apartment and just not go live at the hacienda, but she has strong feelings that she wants to live in a hacienda for several different reasons. So eventually she convinces him and they go to the hacienda, and she starts to notice things kind of strange, kind of out of the ordinary, kind of creepy. I mean, this is marketed as a Mexican gothic horror, and I'm definitely feeling the gothic vibes. We haven't gotten to the full horror elements yet, so I'm really enjoying this so far. I love the setting, and I'm excited to see where the rest of the story goes. Una ventana de ilusión. So this is getting interesting because Don Rodolfo is now going to be returning to the capital and leaving his new wife at the hacienda, at the creepy hacienda with his sister who's kind of acting weird. All right, y'all, so a little update. I am about halfway through the book and I am really loving this one. I think I might be liking it more than Vampires of El Norte, and I loved that one too. But something about this story, I think kind of the mystery element to it is so intriguing, and I just keep wanting to read it to find out what the secrets of this house are. Vampires of El Norte, her other book, was nowhere near as scary as this one is. The other night I was reading it and I was kind of getting freaked out, honestly. There were times where my heart was racing because I was like, oh my gosh. A majority of it is taking place in this one house, in this hacienda, and scary things are happening around our main character and she can't figure out why or what's going on, but she also feels like this is her house and she has gotten to this point, she's earned it and she wants to be here, yet it's almost as if the house is rebelling against her and like it has a mind of its own. It kind of reminds me of the house from Encanto, but scary. So in the book, they're always talking about candles and like having these big candles lit all over the place. So I feel like it was appropriate that I have my candles, even though they're fake. But I would imagine these were kind of like how they looked. But I bet their candles couldn't do this. That would have scared those ghosts away. Algo se está logrando. As scary as this book is, there's some really funny moments too. So something just happened that I was not expecting to happen. I did not see that coming, and I thought I had a feeling where the story was going, and maybe it's still going there, but this kind of puts a wrench in things and I have no idea. But it's still really good, and it's already like 3 in the morning. I just want to keep reading. I don't care. All right, y'all. So last night I read a significant amount more when I should have been sleeping. And then this morning I also woke up and read more. And I officially only have 1 chapter left. So let's finish this. Oh wait, I was wrong. There's 1 more chapter. Wait, there's like 2 more chapters. Oh my gosh, don't tell me it leaves it on a cliffhanger like that. No way. It does, doesn't it? It's one of those endings where it's kind of left open to your interpretation. I'm gonna choose to interpret it in a certain way. I think this has also definitely solidified Isabel Cañas as an auto-buy author for me. I'm probably gonna read every book she ever writes. I just really love her writing style. I love the atmospheric nature of her books. And I also really like that kind of the scary aspects of her books, or like the more magical realism, or I guess you could call it like the paranormal aspects, are definitely there and like real in the book, but they're also more of a metaphor for other things going on, especially just in terms of the time period, like historically, other things going on, a lot of times like in a political sense as well, which is really interesting how she does that. And I love that. Like, it's not like it's scary just to scare you. Like, it definitely did scare me several times in this book, but you could also see that there's more to it, and it was very metaphorical as well, and also very beautifully written. So in Vampires of El Norte, that was more of a kind of monster type spooky book. I don't think that that one was very scary. This one was definitely the scarier book. This one's also a ghost story, so I guess that can kind of go into that as well. But it also wasn't so scary that it wasn't enjoyable for me. Like, I kind of like the creepiness and the spookiness and kind of seeing what was causing all this stuff, and it was just so immersive, and it made me feel like I was in this crazy house. There's a small subplot of romance throughout, but I think that's also more than just a romance. Part of me kind of wants to give it a 5 stars, but then sometimes I like think about giving something a 5 stars, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like so good, that's like committing, you know, to 5 stars, even though it's not that serious, and I don't know why I get like that. So I feel like it's between a 4.5 and a 5 stars. I might just say screw it and give it 5 stars. We're just gonna go with 5 stars for now. If I change my mind later, you'll see it on Goodreads. This is cute. There's like a bunch of little illustrations in this book. Should I read the first line? Coraline discovered the door a little while after they moved into the house. It was a very old house. It had an attic under the roof and a cellar under the ground and an overgrown garden with huge old trees in it. Coraline's family didn't own all of the house. It was too big for that. Instead, they owned a part of it. So a lot of this book is already reminding me of the other book I read of his, The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I mean, which makes sense because he wrote both of them, obviously. But I really like the way he writes about childhood, and it's kind of hard to explain, but like he captures that kind of childlike wonder you have. And there's a C.S. Lewis quote that I just kept thinking about the whole time I was reading this. And it's something along the lines of, a children's story that you can only read once during childhood is not a good children's story at all. And it totally applies to this one. And if you don't know what Coraline is about, it's basically about this girl who moves to this new house with her family. And she really likes to explore and discover new things. And her parents both work from home, so they're busy all the time. You can tell that they're not like dismissive of her, but they're just really busy and don't really have a lot of time to spend with her. And there's this doorway in the house that's closed off with bricks. And one day she goes and opens the door and the bricks aren't there, and there's a long hallway, and she ends up going into this hallway and she discovers something new, and I'm not going to say what in case you don't know, but it's very interesting. It definitely is a little bit creepy, you know, like especially for a children's story. It's creepy. I wouldn't call it scary. There was one quote, let me find it. On the first day Coraline's family moved in, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible made a point of telling Coraline how dangerous the well was, and they warned her to be sure she kept away from it. So Coraline set off to explore for it, so that she knew where it was to keep away from it properly. Like, I feel like that was so cute, and there's a lot of little lines like that where she's like slightly defiant, but not really. But even though this is a children's book or written for a younger audience, I think that any age could read it and enjoy it. The one thing for me though is, since I've seen this movie, I keep visualizing the movie the entire time, and I'm kind of having trouble visualizing the book in my head how it should be, because obviously like if you've seen the Coraline movie, you know like the specific animation style, and it's really difficult for me to picture like a realistic world or like real people, which I think is what was intended. So this is definitely one of those circumstances. I wish I would have read the book before the movie. It's definitely not ruining my experience
at all, but it's also not as exciting if I wouldn't really know the source material and if I would have been able to like visualize the story in my own head.
So I have flown through this one and it's only been like a day and it's going really good so far. This is one of those books that I was just reading it and all of a sudden I was like 17 chapters in and I didn't even realize it, which is awesome because, you know, you never want to really be bored while reading a book. And I think if you're bored reading a thriller in particular, that's not really a good sign because they're supposed to be thrilling. You're supposed to want to keep turning the pages and seeing what's happening next. I don't really know how to talk about this one without giving away spoilers, but let's just say there's a lot of crazy people, kind of crazy, awful people in this one. And at times it's kind of hard to read about, but it's also really interesting to read about in the same time because you're seeing how different people are responding to different events and different things that happen to them. And it is a wild ride. This book is very detailed, very graphic about a lot of different things. And I have just gotten to a point where things have taken a turn and it didn't go in the direction I thought it was gonna go, which, yeah, there was one thing I thought was gonna happen that did end up happening, but then something else completely I was not expecting. So we're gonna see what happens next. I probably am gonna finish this book really soon. We just got a POV of a character we haven't seen yet, but they've been in the story, but we haven't seen it from their perspective. So this is getting really interesting. The funny thing is there's not really a character in this whole book that I like, but I'm also so interested in all of their stories and all of their perspectives. Even though I don't like any, like, I don't feel like there's anybody really to root for, and it's so crazy, but yet I'm not rooting for them, but I'm very fascinated by them, and I want to see what they do next. So last night I finished The Kind Worth Killing, and I thought I was gonna film my reaction to the ending of this book, because usually in thrillers, more often than not, there's an interesting ending, or maybe a twist ending, or something like that, but I ended up not doing that, because I feel like the ending was just kind of okay. I'm getting ahead of myself. So this book, I kind of have mixed feelings about. There's 3 different parts in this book, and the first part, I was super intrigued. I was hooked. I was interested to see where the story was going. It felt like things were getting set up. There was a ton of questions. I didn't really know who to believe, things like that. And then once we got to the second part, it kind of went a little bit downhill for me. There was a really cool plot twist that I didn't see coming, but after that, it just kind of went on and on and on, and it didn't really feel like too much was happening. I think for me in this book, there was a lot of over-explaining, like unnecessary explanations. It would go into characters' backstories and like their parents' backstories and stuff like that, and none of that ever got paid off. So it kind of was like, what's the point? And then also certain descriptions of people doing things like, oh, she drove up here and then she stopped and got lunch and then she got this for lunch and then she went and looked at this and it looked like this and this and this. And those kinds of descriptions can be okay every once in a while, especially if they're alluding to something or if there's something within the descriptions that you're kind of meant to pick up on in a thriller. But in this scenario, they didn't really mean anything, and they happened so much that it was kind of like, okay, come on, like, let's get on with it. Just a lot of over explanations, a lot of kind of repeat scenes through different characters' POVs. I think, like I said, after the first part, it kind of was a little bit downward of a slope for me. A little bit downward, but also a little bit like, Overall, I think it's an okay thriller. I think it's kind of nothing special. And also, I did not like any of the characters in this book, and I don't think you're supposed to, but it wasn't even like I love to hate them. I just kind of felt indifferent to them, and I just kind of lost a lot of interest as well, because they're all just really awful, but not like awful in a fun way, awful in like an obnoxious way. This also is a part of a trilogy, so there's 2 books after this, and I do think that the story is probably better told as a whole. Like if you're gonna read the first book also to read the second and third books because there's kind of a lot left unsaid. And it does kind of feel like this is a setup in a way for the rest of the books. I personally don't know if I have any interest to read the next 2 books though. So overall, I would give this one probably 3 stars. All right, y'all, well, thank you so much for watching. I was kind of thinking of doing a part 2 for this, and instead of like spooky books for spooky season, because this was kind of like a hodgepodge of different genres and different types of books, I was thinking about reading the scariest books I have on my bookshelf. I definitely have a couple horror books that I have been putting off of reading. But let me know if y'all want to see that video down below, and I'll see you next time.